I'm 29 and a few years ago, I inherited a small beach house from my grandfather. This place holds a lot of sentimental value for me and my family. Growing up, we spent a ton of time there, vacations, celebrations, and even just weekend getaways. When my grandfather passed, he left the house to me, and I've made sure to keep it in good condition. I pay for everything, from the bills to maintenance, and take care of it as best I can. It's not a mansion, but it's special, and it's mine. Then there's my younger sister, Lucy, who's 27. She's always been a bit of a drama queen, gets coddled by our parents, especially our mom, and has a tendency to make a scene when things don't go her way. She's the baby of the family, and she knows how to get what she wants. If she's ever told no, she flips out, guilt trips you, and eventually, you cave. For most of my life, I've ignored her theatrics, though it hasn't been easy. But this time, it was different. Things went from irritating to absolutely ridiculous. A few months ago, Lucy got engaged to her longtime boyfriend, Kyle. She was excited, and naturally, she started planning her wedding. One afternoon, she called me and asked if she could use my beach house for the ceremony and reception. At first, I thought it was a great idea. After all, it would be a wonderful way to honor Grandpa's memory. Lucy told me the wedding would be small, only 40 or 50 people, and that she'd take care of everything, the catering, the chairs, the tents, the decor, you name it. Honestly, I felt good about it. I thought it was the perfect way to celebrate such a big moment in our family at a place that meant so much to all of us. But then things started to feel off. It started with the small things. Lucy and Kyle kept mentioning how perfect the house would be for their new life together. At first, I brushed it off, but then I started hearing little whispers from other relatives. One day, my cousin called me and asked, "Is it true that Lucy's planning on moving into the beach house after the wedding?" I was taken aback. She hadn't mentioned that to me. I confronted her about it, and she just waved it off. "Oh, we might stay there for a bit after the wedding until we find a house of our own," she said nonchalantly. I wasn't convinced, and I told her I didn't think it was a good idea. I was the one paying the bills, taking care of everything, and I wasn't comfortable with her just moving in without discussing it first. I told her, "We can talk about it, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page." She got defensive. "You're being selfish. The beach house is part of the family, it's not just yours. Grandpa would have wanted it this way." That's when I started to feel uneasy. I hadn't agreed to any of this, and she seemed to think she had a claim on it. Still, I didn't want to cause a scene, so I decided to let it slide and hoped it would pass. But then, the rumors started getting worse. More family members were coming to me, asking if I'd sold the beach house to Lucy, or if I'd signed any legal documents transferring ownership to her. That's when I knew something was up. I confronted her again, and this time she admitted that she was thinking about renovating the house and making it their permanent home. This felt like a punch in the gut. She'd never once discussed this with me, and now she was already talking about it like it was a done deal. I told her flat out, "Lucy, I've taken care of this place for years. I pay for everything, and I'm not just handing it over to you." But she didn't take it well. "You're being so selfish," she snapped. "I'm your sister. I deserve this. It's not just your house. It's our family's house." It was at that moment that I realized what was going on. She wasn't just asking to borrow the house for a wedding. She was trying to take it. She was acting like she was entitled to it, because it had been in the family for generations. I wasn't about to let that happen, so I told her I needed some time to think about it, but I wasn't giving her the house. A few weeks went by, and I tried to stay out of it, hoping the situation would calm down. But then, one day, I went to the house to clean up and get things ready for the wedding. As I was walking through the kitchen, I noticed a stack of papers on the table. I assumed they were wedding plans or something related to the ceremony, but when I looked closer, my heart dropped. The papers were a set of property transfer forms. They had my name on them, but the signatures were all wrong. Everything about them felt off. They claimed that I had agreed to transfer ownership of the beach house to Lucy. The date was fabricated, and it looked like some sort of half-baked forgery. My stomach turned as I realized what was happening. I immediately called Lucy. She tried to play it off, but eventually admitted she had created the papers herself. "I just thought it would make things easier if we had something official, you know, just in case," she said with an air of nonchalance. That was the moment everything changed. I knew that this was no longer about a wedding. This was about Lucy trying to steal my property. I called her out and she got defensive, telling me I was overreacting, but I wasn't having it. I told her if she ever tried anything like this again, I would take legal action. She didn't seem to care. In fact, she blew up at me, calling me a heartless brother who couldn't support her. We had a huge argument, and it was clear that she wasn't backing down. So I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to protect what was mine. After that phone call with Lucy, I was livid. I couldn't believe my own sister was trying to pull something like this. She hadn't just asked to use the beach house for her wedding. She was already making plans to claim it as her own. The forged documents were proof of that. I was stunned at how far she was willing to go. This wasn't just a matter of miscommunication, this was deliberate, and it was an attempt to take something that wasn't hers. That night, after we fought, I sat in my living room, staring at the fake papers on the kitchen table. The audacity of it all was overwhelming. How could she think she could just manipulate me into giving her the house? Worse, she'd gone as far as to create these fraudulent documents, as if she could just rewrite history to suit her own narrative. My grandfather had built that house with his own 2 hands, and it meant the world to me. It wasn't something to be handed over on a whim or taken by force, especially not like this. I was determined to protect what was mine, and I wasn't going to let Lucy walk all over me. But the last thing I wanted to do was escalate things and ruin her wedding. I thought, maybe she'd calm down after the wedding and realize how out of line she was. So I made the decision to keep quiet for now. I wasn't going to back down from my stance, but I wasn't going to be the person to cause chaos at her wedding either. I figured the best course of action was to stay vigilant, wait for the wedding to pass, and then deal with things after the fact. The weeks leading up to the wedding were tense. Every time I saw Lucy, I could feel the weight of the situation between us. She acted like nothing had happened, going on with her wedding plans as if everything was fine. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about the fake documents and her obvious intention to take the house. Every time she mentioned the beach house, I was reminded of how manipulative she had been, and it made my blood boil. The day before the wedding, she showed up at the house with Kyle, her fiancé, and a small army of wedding planners. They were running through the final preparations, talking about the setup and what would go where. I tried to stay out of the way, but it felt impossible to avoid the tension in the air. As I watched them scurry around, I couldn't help but notice how Kyle kept asking me questions about the beach house. "Do you think you'd ever sell it?" he asked casually, though I could tell there was something more behind the question. "How much are the property taxes?" he continued, as if he were doing some sort of mental calculation. It was unsettling. It was like they were trying to gather information, fishing for an angle. I didn't bite. I just gave short answers and kept my distance. At that point, I had no doubt that Kyle was just as involved in the scheme as Lucy was. They weren't interested in celebrating the wedding. They were interested in taking over what wasn't theirs. I told myself I'd stay out of their way and let them do their thing. The wedding was just a day away, and I hoped that once the celebration was over, they'd finally drop this ridiculous notion that the beach house was theirs. But deep down, I knew I was fooling myself. Lucy had shown her true colors, and there was no way she was just going to let this go. The day of the wedding came, and things were off from the start. I arrived early, helping out with the final touches, making sure everything was in order. The weather was perfect for a beach wedding, clear skies, a warm breeze, the sun shining down. But the vibe around the house was anything but peaceful. Lucy was in full bridezilla mode, micromanaging every little detail. The chairs weren't positioned properly. The flowers weren't white enough. The table settings were too informal. She was stressed, snapping at people, and I could tell she was overwhelmed. I tried to stay out of her way as much as possible, but it was hard not to notice how she was acting. There she was, in the place where I'd spent so many happy moments with family, treating it like it was her personal kingdom, shouting at vendors, ordering people around, and acting like she owned the place. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its own way. She walked down the makeshift aisle on the sand, her dress billowing in the wind. She and Kyle exchanged vows, and everyone cheered. For a moment, it felt like things might go smoothly, like maybe I'd been wrong to doubt her. But deep down, I knew better. I knew this wasn't the end. The reception was when things really started to fall apart. Lucy stood up to give her thank you speech, and to my absolute horror, she made an announcement that took everyone by surprise. "Kyle and I are so happy to finally be married," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "And we'll be making the beach house our forever home. Narrator's name has already agreed to hand it over to us, so we're so grateful to be able to start our life here." The room went silent for a moment. A few guests exchanged confused glances. My father's face went pale. I was frozen in shock. My heart dropped to my stomach. What the hell was she doing? I didn't know what to do. I could feel the tension in the air, and I saw a couple of relatives looking at me, their eyes wide, waiting for me to react. I couldn't believe she'd done this in front of everyone, claiming that I had agreed to hand over my grandfather's house as if it were a gift. I stood up and walked toward her, my hands shaking with anger. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, trying not to cause a scene. "Why are you lying about this?" She turned to me, her face a mask of faux innocence. "Don't ruin my day," she hissed. "You barely use the house anyway. Just let me have it." I was stunned. She called me selfish again, just like she always did when things didn't go her way. But this time, it was different. I wasn't about to back down. As I turned to walk away, a family friend pulled me aside. "Is it true? Is the beach house really going to her?" "No," I said firmly. "It's not true. She's making it all up." The rest of the evening was a blur. The wedding that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a battlefield. Guests were whispering, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. I kept an eye on Lucy, watching her cry at the bar, telling people that I was a control freak and that I was ruining her dream. I knew this was far from over, and as the night went on, I could feel the weight of what was coming next. The wedding was barely over, but my sister had already made it clear that she wasn't just asking to use the beach house for her wedding. She was trying to steal it, and that was something I would never allow. The night of the wedding ended in a strange, uncomfortable silence. People were whispering, unsure of what had just happened, and I could feel the weight of their stares. Some were trying to ignore the tension, while others seemed genuinely confused. I wasn't sure what upset me more, Lucy's bold announcement, or the fact that she had the audacity to try and manipulate everyone into believing. I had agreed to give her the beach house. That was a line I couldn't let her cross, not in front of everyone. I'd let things slide for too long, hoping she would come to her senses, but this was beyond acceptable. After the reception wound down, I pulled her aside. I wasn't interested in making a scene, but I couldn't just let this lie sit. The anger bubbling inside me was hard to ignore, but I managed to keep my voice calm as I addressed her. "Lucy, what the hell was that? Why would you tell everyone that I agreed to give you the beach house?" She looked at me with that same manipulative smile, the one she'd used since we were kids whenever she was in trouble. "I didn't think it would be such a big deal," she said, her tone dismissive. "I thought you'd just let it happen. We're family, right?" I shook my head, trying to control my frustration. "It's not about family, Lucy. It's about respect. You don't just take what's mine. You don't get to decide that I'm going to give you something that's been in our family for generations." My voice was a little louder now, but I didn't care. She needed to hear this. Lucy, however, didn't care to listen. Instead, she crossed her arms and snapped back. "You're being ridiculous. It's just a house. It's not like you even live there. What's the harm in letting me have it? Grandpa would have wanted me to have it, and you know it." Hearing her try to justify it like that made my blood boil. "You don't get to speak for Grandpa," I shot back. "You don't know what he would have wanted. And you certainly don't know what he would have wanted in terms of who gets to keep the house. It's mine. I'm the one who's been maintaining it, paying the bills, and taking care of it. Not you. Not anyone else." She looked at me for a moment, almost as if she were considering what I was saying, but then her face hardened. "Fine, whatever," she said dismissively. "You're not going to ruin my wedding over this. It's my special day." She walked off, leaving me standing there, my chest tight with anger. I wanted to grab her and shake some sense into her, but I knew it would only make things worse. This wasn't the time or place for a full-on confrontation. But at that moment, I knew something had to be done. I had tried being patient. I had hoped she'd back down after the wedding, but she wasn't. She thought she could just waltz into my life, take what was mine, and manipulate everyone around her to get away with it. I didn't want to escalate things, but after tonight, I knew there was no choice. I had to protect what was rightfully mine, and I couldn't let her get away with this. Not after everything she'd done. That night, I stayed up late, thinking about what I should do. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. I couldn't just let it go. I called a lawyer friend of mine, someone I knew I could trust, and explained the situation. He listened carefully and gave me solid advice. "You have every right to protect your property," he said. "If she's forging documents and telling people you've given it to her, that's not just family drama. That's fraud. You need to take action to protect yourself." I knew he was right. It was time to stop playing nice. Lucy had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next day, I went over everything with my lawyer. We discussed what steps I needed to take, and I began gathering evidence. I took screenshots of Lucy's social media posts, where she'd claimed the house was hers. I kept copies of the forged documents she had left on my kitchen table. I even had the wedding speech recorded, where she had clearly told everyone the beach house was already hers. All of it was evidence that would protect me if things went further. Once I had everything in order, my lawyer helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter, demanding that Lucy stop spreading these lies about the beach house. The letter made it clear that if she didn't back off, I would take legal action. If she tried to sell or transfer ownership of the property, it would be considered fraud, and I would pursue criminal charges. I felt a sense of relief once the letter was sent. At least I had taken the first step to protect myself and my family's legacy. But I also knew this wasn't going to end quietly. I knew Lucy wouldn't back down easily. She had always gotten her way, and now that her plans were being thwarted, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. A couple of days later, I was having dinner with my dad when he mentioned that he had heard about Lucy's actions. "I know this whole thing is getting out of hand," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But you're doing the right thing, son. You can't let her get away with this." "I don't want to make a big deal out of it," I said, my frustration evident. "But she's crossing a line, Dad. It's not just about the house anymore, it's about respect. She can't just take something that doesn't belong to her." My dad nodded. "I get it. I think this letter will make her realize that she can't just do whatever she wants. Hopefully this will be the wake-up call she needs." I wasn't so sure. Lucy had always been used to getting what she wanted, and I knew she wasn't the type to back down without a fight. But I also knew that I couldn't let her push me around anymore. This wasn't just about family. It was about standing up for what was right. A few days later, I got the phone call I was expecting. It was Lucy. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You're ruining everything. You're ruining my wedding. All I wanted was a place to start my life with Kyle. Why are you being so cruel?" I could hear the hurt in her voice, but I wasn't buying it. "I'm not being cruel, Lucy," I said. "I'm protecting what's mine. What you've done isn't just about wanting a place to live. It's about lying, forging documents, and trying to manipulate everyone around you. This is not okay." She was silent for a long moment. I could tell she didn't know how to respond. Then, she finally spoke, her tone filled with anger. "You'll regret this, I swear. You've ruined everything." And with that, she hung up. I didn't feel bad about what I'd done. Sure, it was painful to have to confront my own sister, but I knew I was in the right. I wasn't going to let her get away with trying to steal my house, and I wasn't going to be intimidated by her threats. It was time to put my foot down, and I was ready for whatever came next. The cease and desist letter was sent off, and while I felt some sense of relief knowing that I had taken a stand, I couldn't help but feel anxious. This was just the beginning, and I knew my sister wasn't the type to back down easily. Lucy had always been manipulative, and now she had made it clear she wasn't going to let this go without a fight. I had no illusions that this would resolve peacefully, but I wasn't going to let her walk all over me, especially after everything she'd done. A few days after the letter was sent, I didn't hear from Lucy directly, but the ripple effects of the letter were already being felt. Our family, especially our parents, were starting to get involved more, and I could tell they were trying to smooth things over. My mom, who had always been the peacekeeper, called me one evening. She was upset, her voice trembling as she tried to convince me that I was taking things too far. "Please, honey," she said, her voice soft and pleading. "Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. Lucy is stressed, and I'm sure she didn't mean for things to go this far. She's just trying to start her life with Kyle." I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I wasn't about to let it sway me. "Mom, this isn't just about Lucy starting her life," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "It's about her trying to take something that doesn't belong to her. The beach house isn't just a place for her to live. It's been in our family for generations. It's mine. She's been making up lies about it and forging documents. This is way bigger than a misunderstanding." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, my mom sighed, her voice tinged with regret. "I know, but please don't ruin the family over this. Can't you just let it go?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. I had to remind myself that this wasn't just about my sister. This was about protecting my own boundaries. "I can't let it go, Mom. I've tried, but she's crossed a line. I'm not going to let her take my house. I'm doing what I have to do to make sure this stops here." There was no more convincing me, and I could tell that my mom knew that. She didn't push the issue anymore, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. It was hard for her to accept that things had escalated to this point, but I wasn't going to back down. If Lucy wanted to manipulate and deceive, she needed to learn there were consequences. The next day, my dad called. He was much more direct and supportive of me than my mom had been. "You're doing the right thing," he said, his voice calm but stern. You can't just let her walk all over you like that. Forging documents is serious. If she thinks she can just take what's yours, she's in for a rude awakening. I appreciated my dad's support. He had always been the more pragmatic one, and I could sense that he understood the gravity of the situation. He also knew that Lucy had pushed too far this time. "We've got your back," he added. "Just make sure you keep everything documented. I know it's messy, but you've got to protect what's yours." That was all I needed to hear. My dad's support gave me the strength to stay resolute. The following morning, I got a message from my lawyer, who confirmed that Lucy had received a letter. I wasn't sure what kind of reaction I was expecting from her, but I definitely wasn't prepared for what came next. Lucy's response came a few hours later. She sent me a text that was passive-aggressive at best. "Nice try, but you can't just take everything from me. You've ruined my wedding day, but you won't win. This is just a phase, and I'll make sure you regret this." That text was a clear sign she wasn't backing down. But honestly, I wasn't surprised. Lucy was always like this, always turning situations to her advantage, always trying to manipulate the people around her. She had a way of making herself the victim when she was clearly in the wrong. I didn't respond to the text right away. Instead, I sat with it for a while, letting it sink in. It was clear that she wasn't going to let go of her entitlement easily, but she had underestimated me. I wasn't some pushover. I wasn't going to let her spin her lies and take what was mine. A few days later, I heard through the family grapevine that Lucy had been talking to some of our relatives about the situation. Apparently, she was telling them that I was being unreasonable, that I had betrayed her, and that I was doing this because I was selfish and jealous of her new life with Kyle. This was classic Lucy. She had always been able to twist things in her favor, but I wasn't going to let her play the victim this time. She even tried to convince a few cousins that Grandpa had actually meant for the house to go to her all along. She painted herself as the rightful heir, as if I had somehow taken something that was hers. I couldn't believe the audacity of it, but I also knew that these were just more of her manipulative tactics. She was spreading lies to make people feel sorry for her. At that point, I decided I needed to take even more direct action. I couldn't let this continue unchecked. I called my lawyer again and we discussed the next steps. He suggested I send another letter, this time being even more explicit about the consequences of her actions. If she continued to spread false claims or try to sell the house, we'd have grounds to take legal action. Fraud was a serious charge, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. A few days after the conversation with my lawyer, I got a call from my dad. She's talking to a real estate agent, trying to figure out how much she could get if she sold the beach house. He told me, "You need to do something about this before she goes any further." That was it. I wasn't going to let her continue this charade. I immediately called my lawyer, and we drafted the second letter. This time, it was clear. If Lucy tried to sell the house or even made any attempt to transfer ownership, I would file a criminal complaint for fraud. This wasn't a petty family dispute anymore. This was a legal matter. I also told my dad to confront her. I knew Lucy would listen to him more than me, and I hoped that hearing the seriousness of the situation from him would make her back off. My dad agreed to talk to her, and I hoped that this time, the message would hit home. As much as I didn't want to escalate things further, I knew there was no other choice. I had to protect my property, my family's legacy, and I wasn't about to let my sister destroy everything for her own selfish gain. After sending the second letter, things got quieter, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. I knew Lucy well enough to understand that just because she seemed to back off didn't mean she had given up. I wasn't going to wait around for her to make another move. I had already told my lawyer to stay on standby, just in case things escalated again. To be safe, I decided to upgrade the security system at the beach house. I installed cameras, motion sensors, and better locks. I wasn't just protecting the house anymore. I was protecting myself. I couldn't trust Lucy to respect my boundaries. I made sure to check on the house more often, even if it was just to check the new system or take a walk around. I wasn't going to let her pull another stunt without me knowing. One weekend, I invited a few close friends over for a barbecue at the house. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend, something to help me unwind after all the tension with Lucy. But it wasn't long before my dad stopped by. I could see the concern on his face. "I still can't believe how far she took this," he said, shaking his head. "It's crazy. I never thought things would go this far with her." I nodded, agreeing. "Me neither. I just wanted a simple wedding, but she's made it into something else entirely. Now it's a full-blown legal mess." We sat on the deck for a while, watching the waves, and my dad offered some comfort. "You did the right thing, son. She can't just take what's yours, no matter how much she tries to twist things. I'm proud of how you've handled this. It meant a lot to hear that from him. For a while, I had been second-guessing myself, wondering if I was overreacting. But hearing my dad confirm that I was doing the right thing reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. I had done everything I could to be fair, but at this point, fairness was no longer an option. That night, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't going to let Lucy destroy everything. The beach house was mine, and I would protect it at all costs. But I also knew this wasn't over. I couldn't relax just yet. The real challenge was still ahead, making sure Lucy understood the consequences of her actions. The tension didn't just stay between Lucy and me. It spread through the entire family. While some relatives quietly sided with me, others, especially Mom, were torn. She'd always been the one to patch things up, to make peace between us. But even she had to admit that Lucy had crossed a line this time. I was done with the manipulation and the lies. Lucy's reputation took a massive hit within the family. The forged documents, the lies about the house being hers, it all became too much for everyone to ignore. Even the cousins who were normally on her side started to ask questions. I overheard one of them talking to my dad asking, "Did Lucy really think she could just take the house?" People started talking. The recordings of her wedding speech, where she declared the beach house was hers, made it clear to everyone who was lying. That was the nail in the coffin. Lucy tried to play it off, but no one bought her excuses anymore. She tried to tell a few people that I had made up the forgery story, but by then, the damage was already done. Too many people knew the truth, and Lucy had nowhere to hide. As for me, things started to settle down. I was still dealing with the fallout from the family drama, but I was finally starting to enjoy some peace. I could go to the beach house without worrying about Lucy, trying to pull some new stunt. It felt good to have that sense of security again, to know that I had protected what was mine. A few weeks later, Lucy sent me a half-hearted message in the family group chat. It was one of those let's move on and forget this happened messages, where she apologized but never actually admitted to any wrongdoing. She said she didn't want any more drama. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I had been clear about my boundaries, and I wasn't going to entertain her excuses anymore. I had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, family can surprise you in the worst way. But I also learned how important it is to stand my ground and protect myself, even if it means dealing with the fallout. I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of me again, no matter who they were. As for Lucy, she knows better now. She might have lost her chance to manipulate me, but it's a lesson I'm sure she won't forget.